Deep within the shadowed halls of the Escorial, a single candle flickers, casting long, golden silhouettes of kings who once ruled half the world. You are not just listening to a story. You are stepping into a 1,000-year-old dream of gold, blood, and silent stone. Before the first crown was forged, this land was a wilderness of ghosts, and tonight, those ghosts have invited you to rest among them. Listen closely to the breath of the Iberian wind. It carries the faint scent of orange blossoms from Cordoba and the cold metallic sting of Visigothic iron. For centuries, empires here didn't just fall. They dissolved into the earth, leaving behind a silence so heavy it can pull you into the deepest sleep. We are moving away from the noise of the modern world, drifting toward a horizon where time is measured not by hours, but by the slow crumbling of Roman marble. The Iberian Peninsula is a rugged, beautiful land, defined by the relentless embrace of the Atlantic and the Mediterranean. For thousands of years, civilizations have washed over this earth like tide water against the cliffs, rising in brilliant, golden foam only to recede back into the quiet depths of the past. This is a tapestry of long, quiet nights and the heavy, velvet dreams of those who wore the crown. It is a portrait composed of the weathered marble fragments of Rome, the intricate, shimmering geometry of Islamic light, and the unyielding, iron-wrought faith of the North. All these pieces, once sharp and conflicting, let the flickering thoughts of the present dissolve. There is nothing you need to do, and nowhere else you need to be. Only you, your steady breath, and the cooling embers of a history that has already been written. We are moving backward now, drifting through the haze, seeking the very first shadows to walk upon this golden earth. We travel to a time of foundations, to the very beginning of the Spanish dream, where the first kings rose from the ruins of an empire that forgot how to sleep. The steady rhythmic clip-clop of horse hooves echoes against the worn stone paths of the 5th century, a sound that lingers in the cool evening air. These are the sounds of a world in transition, a weary continent exhaling as the old Roman sun finally dips below the horizon. From the misty, frost-bitten forests of the far north, the Visigoths arrived, Germanic warriors with tired eyes and heavy shields, seeking a place where the earth felt firm beneath their feet. They were wanderers, outsiders who had once stood at the very gates of Rome, and now they found themselves in the sun-drenched silence of Iberia. They did not come to destroy, but to gather the scattered, golden fragments of a collapsed empire and piece them together into something new, something their own. In the heart of this rugged land, they chose Toledo as their sanctuary. High upon its rocky perch, they built a kingdom out of salvaged marble and stubborn ambition. For these people, life was a long, unrelenting cycle of shadows, and steel a constant march through dust and heat. Yet, beneath their ironclad exterior, there lived a quiet, aching longing for a home that did not require a sword to defend. They dreamed of orchards, of stone hearths, and of a peace that would last longer than a single reign. Their story is written in the very dust of the Spanish plains, a tale of a restless people finally learning the language of the soil. But the crown of the Visigoths was a heavy and precarious thing. Unlike the dynasties that would follow centuries later, power here did not simply flow through the warmth of royal blood. It was a crown won in the open air, granted by the thunderous recognition of a circle of knights and nobles. To be a king was not a birthright, but a burden bestowed by the collective will of the strong. This was a raw, primal form of democracy, one that was born in the mud and nurtured in the flickering torchlight of great halls. It was a system that demanded strength, yet it often invited the very violence it sought to organize, creating a foundation for the Spanish soul that was as fragile as glass and as hard as diamond. Now, as the centuries have piled like fallen leaves over their graves, the clamor of their councils has faded into a deep velvety hush. The heavy broadswords that once gleamed in the Iberian sun have returned to the earth, resting in the dark, cool silence beneath the roots of ancient olive trees. They are orange with rust now, dissolving slowly back into the clay from which they were forged. Those fierce warriors who once rode through the breaking dawn with fire in their hearts have finally found the eternal stillness they so desperately crave. Their journey is over, and the land has accepted them into its long, dreamless sleep. But even as their shadows retreat into the mist, the stones they laid remain. In the sacred silence of Toledo, a different kind of beauty was beginning to take shape, etched slowly and meticulously into the very soul of the rock. The wind whispers softly as it weaves through the ancient stone arches of Toledo, a low, melodic sigh that has echoed across this rocky plateau for 1,500 years. Up here, where the earth meets the sky in a jagged embrace, the air feels different, thicker with memory, cooler with the breath of the past. You are standing in the spiritual heart of an era, a city carved directly into the rugged spine of the peninsula. Below, the Tagus River flows in a deep, silent curve, guarding the secrets of the kings who once looked out from these very heights, watching the stars align over a kingdom that was still learning its own name. It was here, amidst these iron-gray cliffs, that King Luvigild sought to bind a fragmented world together. In the quiet halls of his palace, he moved with a deliberate, weary grace, drafting the laws and refining the faiths that would become the bedrock of a nation. Imagine the scratch of a quill on parchment. In the dead of night, the only sound in a city hushed by the weight of its own importance. Toledo was not built on open plains. It was etched into a labyrinth of narrow, winding streets, dark ribbons of shadow that twist and turn like silken threads in a grand, historical tapestry. To walk these streets is to vanish into the folds of time, where every corner holds a silence that feels sacred, and every stone wall radiates a coolness that settles deep into your soul. Yet, there is a mystery that rests just beneath your feet, hidden from the light of the sun, deep under the heavy floorboards of these ancient homes, and within the lightless chambers of forgotten cellars, there are echoes of something more. Legends speak of the Table of Solomon and the lost gold of Rome treasures, buried so deep that the soil itself seems to hum with their presence. If you listen closely in the stillness of the night, you might almost hear the faint, metallic whisper of ancient riches, guarded by the very earth that gave the Visigoths their home. It is a hidden pulse, a secret heartbeat of gold and silver that has slept undisturbed while centuries turn to dust above. Now let your mind drift as you imagine yourself toddling slowly over these smooth, cool cobblestones. Feel the solid, unyielding strength of the mountain beneath your feet, a firm foundation that has outlasted a dozen empires. The world around you is perfectly still. The heavy scent of sun-warmed stone begins to fade as the air grows crisp, and the long shadows of the arches reach out to cradle the city in a protective embrace. You are safe in the arms of the rock, grounded by the sheer permanence of this place. But as the last rays of the sun catch the golden crest of the cathedral, the long evening of the Visigoths is drawing to a close. The orange glow on the horizon is shifting, and soon a brilliant, radiant dawn will break from the south, bringing with it a light that will change the face of this land forever. The soft, rhythmic trickling of water echoes through the palace gardens, flowing through narrow marble channels like a cooling pulse under the skin of the earth. This is the sound of Al-Andalus, a world where the desert met the orchard and where a new, radiant light began to wash over the Iberian Peninsula. As the north remained gripped in shadows, the south blossomed. The air here is heavy and sweet, perfumed with the intoxicating scent of night-blooming jasmine and orange blossoms brought from distant lands. It was a civilization that valued the curve of a dome as much as the sharpness of a sword, bringing with it a profound mastery of science, mathematics, and the quiet art of living. At the center of this golden dream was Cordoba. Imagine a city where the oil lamps never went out, illuminating thousands of library shelves that groaned under the weight of ancient wisdom, while the rest of the world struggled to find its way through the dark. The scholars of Al-Andalus were charting the stars and translating the lost thoughts of the ancients into a language of beauty. The great mosque, with its endless forest of candy-striped arches, stood as a testament to this harmony, a place where the eye could wander forever and never find a sharp edge, only the infinite, repeating geometry of peace. In this enlightened era, the social fabric itself was woven with threads that the rest of the world would not discover for centuries. While shadows of illiteracy hung over the courts of Europe, the cities of Al-Andalus thrived with a rare intellectual vitality. Remarkably, it was an age where women were often the keepers of the flame. Many were deeply educated, serving as skilled copyists, poets, and even managers of the vast royal libraries. They moved through these halls of knowledge with a quiet authority, reading and writing in an age when such things were considered miracles elsewhere. This was a society that understood that true power lay not in the fist, but in the enlightened mind. As you listen to the fountain song, imagine the profound stillness that once settled over these courtyards at midnight. The conflict of the world felt like a distant rumor, muffled by the thick stone walls and the lush green canopies of the patios. There was a rare, delicate harmony here, a brief moment in history where different faiths lived beneath the same silver moon, sharing the same water and the same starlight. It was a beautiful dream, a fragile paradise that felt as though it could last forever. But even as the scholars of Cordoba blew out their lamps for the night, a different kind of sound was stirring in the cold, misty caves of the Asturias Mountains. To the north, a low, persistent call that was beginning to wake the sleeping kings of the old world. The air is thin and cold here, high in the rugged peaks of the Asturias. Listen to the low, rhythmic murmur of prayers echoing within the sacred cave of Covadonga, sound that feels as old as the mountain itself. This is where it began, not with a thunderous charge, but with a quiet, stubborn flame of hope kept alive by a handful of survivors. The Reconquista was not a war of momentary anger. It was a patient, 800-year conversation between a people and their land. It was a marathon of the soul, a steady pulse of faith that outlasted generations, dynasties, and centuries. As you breathe in the crisp, mountain air, imagine the small kingdoms of the North Leon, Castile, and Aragon growing as slowly and surely as saplings pushing through the cracks in the Roman stone. There was no rush, only the persistent, quiet strength of roots finding their way home. Each decade brought another mile of territory, another village reclaimed, and another bell tower rising against the horizon. It was a slow, deliberate reconstruction of an identity, a long journey toward a unity that many would never live to see, yet everyone believed in with a calm, unwavering certainty. The Reconquista stands alone as the longest continuous conflict in human history. Yes, for those who lived it, it did not feel like a constant battle, but rather a long-term commitment to a dream. It was a marathon of patience, where the victory was not measured in blood, but in the enduring legacy of a culture that refused to be forgotten. This was a struggle defined by the slow passage of time, where the ultimate prize was the right to simply exist in the sun. As each piece of the land returned, it brought with it a profound sense of stillness. Imagine the heavy doors of ancient cathedrals swinging open after centuries, the cool incense-scented silence within welcoming back the weary. The land felt settled, as if it were finally exhaling after holding its breath for an age. You are safe in this world of stone and prayer, grounded by the sheer endurance of those who came before. But as the mist clears from the Castilian plains, the dust of the road begins to rise, and from the golden haze of history, a legendary figure emerges, a knight whose name would become a song of the wind itself. A great, sweeping wind rushes across the vast golden plains of Castile, carrying with it the scent of dry earth and old leather. In the distance, the silhouette of a lone rider appears against the setting sun. This is Rodrigo Diaz de Vivar, the man the world would come to know as El Cid. He was a figure carved from the very elements of Iberia, composed of both the fierce pride of the north and the refined wisdom of the south. El Cid lived in the spaces between empires, a bridge between two faiths, serving both Christian kings and Islamic emirs with a loyalty that transcended the simple boundaries of his time. He was the ultimate symbol of honor in a world of shifting allegiances. Despite betrayal, exile, and the envy of lesser men, Rodrigo remained as unyielding as the mountains. His story is one of profound dignity, a man who sought not just to conquer land, but to master his own destiny. To the people, he was more than a soldier. He was a living myth, a man whose presence alone could turn the tide of a struggle. His life was a testament to the idea that true nobility is found in one's character, not just in the titles granted by a crown. Even death could not halt his legend. As the story goes, during the final defense of Valencia, his body was dressed in full armor and strapped to his great horse, Babica Daughterwol. As the gates opened and the silent night rode out into the breaking dawn, his enemies were struck by a supernatural awe, believing they were facing a celestial warrior. His final victory was won in total silence, a triumph of the spirit over the flesh. It is a haunting, beautiful image of a man riding into eternity, his mantle fluttering in the wind, leading his people one last time through the sheer power of his memory. The chronicles of El Cid read like a long, mournful ballad, a song of romance, lonely roads, and the high price of honor. His name echoes through the centuries like a bell in the night, reminding us of a time when a single man's word was the strongest fortress in the land. But the era of the solitary hero is fading now, dissolving like the evening shadows. The world is growing larger, and the individual paths of knights are converging toward a singular, magnificent union. The sound of a single horse is about to be replaced by the pealing bells of a royal wedding, a union of two crowns that will beat as one heart. The joyous, rhythmic pealing of cathedral bells fills the air, resonating through the stone streets and soaring into the clear blue sky. It is a sound of celebration, yet it carries a weight of immense gravity. In a quiet, candlelit chamber, Isabella of Castile and Ferdinand of Aragon stand together, two individuals, two distinct kingdoms, but possessed of a single, unyielding vision. Their union was not merely a marriage of convenience, it was the birth of a nation's soul. Together, they would dismantle the old chaos of warring lords and fractured laws, weaving the loose threads of Iberia into the first true garment of a modern state. Theirs was a journey that began in the shadows of secrecy. Imagine a young Isabella, defying the will of a powerful court, traveling in disguise through the dangerous countryside to meet the man she chose for her destiny. It was a union born of both political necessity and a deep, mutual respect, a rare alignment of two brilliant minds. They walked a delicate line, balancing their individual powers while forging a central authority that would bring a long-desired order to the land. Under their watch, the first foundations of a unified Spain were laid, stone by deliberate stone. Through their partnership, a profound sense of truer order began to settle over the peninsula. They standardized the currency, reformed the laws, and brought a newfound stability to the lives of millions. The constant flicker of internal rebellion was extinguished, replaced by the steady, warm glow of a centralized crown. To the common people, this union felt like the arrival of a calm evening after a century of storms. There was a sense that the world was finally making sense, that there was a hand on the rudder, guiding the ship of state toward a horizon of unprecedented glory. Feel the heavy, comforting weight of this stability as you drift deeper into the story. The land is no longer a collection of fragments. It is a solid, unified entity, breathing in unison with the hearts of its monarchs. The air is still, the fires in the hearths burn low and steady, and the streets are safe for the first time in memory. But even in this newfound peace, there is one final piece of the puzzle remaining, a last fortress of the past that stands as a beautiful, melancholy barrier to the future. To finish the story of the old world, Isabella and Ferdinand must now turn their gaze toward the red towers of the south. The haunting, mournful notes of a stringed instrument drift through the red-walled corridors of the Alhambra, a melody that feels like a sigh from the very heart of the earth. It is the year 1492, a year that would change the world forever. But here, in the lush gardens of Granada, it is a time of profound and poetic endings. Boabdil, the last sultan, stands at the gates, the heavy iron keys to his kingdom resting in his palms. He looks upon the intricate carvings and the cooling fountains of his home one last time, knowing that a cycle of 800 years is finally coming to a close. As he rode away from the city, Boabdil paused at a high mountain pass to look back at the paradise he had lost. It is said he wept openly, a moment forever remembered as the Moor's last sigh. His mother, witnessing his grief, offered words that have echoed through history. Do not weep like a woman for what you could not defend like a man. It is a harsh, cold sentence, yet it captures the bittersweet nature of that moment, the collision of a fading dream and a rising reality. The surrender was not an act of violence, but a graceful, somber passing of the torch. The fall of Granada was the final brushstroke on the map of the peninsula. As the keys changed hands, the vibrant, multi-layered history of Al-Andalus did not simply vanish. It settled into the soil, becoming part of the very foundation of the new Spain. The end of this dynasty was as quiet and inevitable as a single leaf drifting onto the still surface of a pool. The old world was folding itself away, tucking its memories into the shadows of the Alhambra's arches, making room for a story so vast it would span across oceans. As the gates of Granada closed behind the retreating sultan, a heavy velvet silence descends over the gardens. The air is still, the water in the fountains continues to flow, and the stars begin to emerge over the Sierra Nevada. You are drifting now, floating on the edge of a new era. The old frontiers have dissolved, and the horizon is no longer a limit, but an invitation. As the lights of Granada fade into the dusk, a new door is opening, one that leads away from the stone fortresses of the past and out toward the endless, shimmering blue of the great Atlantic. The rhythmic, hypnotic splashing of waves against a wooden hull is the only sound in the vast open dark. High above, a lonely seagull cries, a fading echo that soon vanishes into the mist. It is the year 1492, and three small ships, the Nina, the Pinta, and the Santa Maria, are drifting into the great blue void of the Atlantic. Christopher Columbus stands at the prow, his eyes weary from searching a horizon that refuses to yield. Around him, the world is nothing but water and stars. There are no maps for where they are going, only the steady, unwavering pull of the unknown. Imagine the profound silence of those long nights at sea. The wind hums softly through the rigging, a low lullaby that lulls the tired sailors into a state of heavy, salt-sprayed dreaming. For weeks, they have been suspended between two worlds, leaving the familiar shores of Iberia far behind. The air is cool and damp, carrying the scent of deep ocean and ancient timber. On these ships, time has lost its meaning. There is only the rise and fall of the swell, the creaking of the masts, and the silver path of the moon reflecting on the black mirror of the deep. Columbus set sail with a heart full of ambition, seeking the glittering gold of the East to fill the coffers of the Spanish crown. He sought a shortcut to riches, a path of spice and silk, but the destiny of Spain had a different plan. Instead of the Orient, he stumbled upon a doorway to a new world. He sought a prize for a king, but he found a legacy for an empire, expanding the boundaries of the known world until the map itself could no longer contain the Spanish dream. As you listen to the steady breath of the ocean, feel yourself swaying with the gentle motion of the ship. You are safe here, cradled by the rhythmic pulse of the tide. The heavy dark water carries you further and further away from the noise of the shore. The stars above are fixed and bright, watching over your journey as you drift deeper into the velvet embrace of sleep. But even as the new world begins to emerge from the morning mist, the gold brought back across these waters carries with it the long, somber shadows of an unyielding faith. The sound of heavy, muffled footsteps echoes through the long, cold stone corridors of a silent monastery. It is a slow, deliberate pace that speaks of iron discipline and hidden thoughts. In the cities of Spain, a new kind of silence has descended, the silence of the Inquisition. This was a time when the inner world of a person's soul became the most guarded of fortresses. Behind thick oak doors and beneath vaulted ceilings, the light of flickering candles casts long, dancing shadows against walls that have seen centuries of secrets. The air in these halls is thin and smells of old incense and cold ash. The Inquisition was born from a desire for a singular, unified identity, a way to bind a diverse land under one banner of faith. But as the years turned into decades, that search for purity transformed into a pervasive, quiet dread that touched every corner of society. It was an age of whispered confessions and heavy curtains, where the most profound truths were often kept in the lightless chambers of the heart. The cities grew quiet, and the laughter in the plazas was replaced by the somber gravity of the spiritual court. While the Inquisition was intended to bring a sense of divine order, it eventually became a shadow that stretched across centuries. It was a marathon of vigilance, a system that sought to control the invisible boundaries of thought. Yet, in the grand scale of history, these fears have long since dissolved. The heavy ledges of the Inquisitors, once so powerful, are now nothing more than faded scraps of parchment, their ink crumbling into dust. The voices that once whispered in fear have been silenced by the compassionate hand of time, leaving behind only the peaceful stillness of the stone. You are safe now, far removed from the weight of those ancient judgments. The cold stones of the past have been warmed by the sun of many centuries, and the shadows have retreated into the mist. Feel the quiet safety of this moment, where no one watches, and no one judges. You are free to simply be, to let your thoughts wander like smoke in a windless room. But as the empire grows larger and the shadows longer, the weight of this vast dominion begins to settle on the shoulders of a single tired man. Listen to the soft, rhythmic crackle of a dying fire in a palace hearth and the low, weary exhale of a man who has spent his life carrying the weight of half the world. This is Charles V, the Holy Roman Emperor, a king who ruled an empire so vast that the sun truly never set upon his lands. But power of this magnitude comes at a staggering price. Charles spent his years not in the comfort of a throne, but in the saddle, moving restlessly between the fog of the Netherlands and the heat of Spain, fighting wars of religion and politics that never seem to end. The air around him is heavy with the scent of old leather and melting wax. Imagine the emperor in the quiet hours of the night, his body aching from the relentless march of time. The greatest ruler of Europe, the man who commanded vast armies and immense fleets, was plagued by the agonizing sting of gout and the crushing exhaustion of a life lived for duty. In the stillness of his private chambers, he did not dream of more gold or more land. He dreamed of a simple, humble meal, eaten in total silence, and a bed where the demands of the state could not find him. His weariness was the weariness of an entire age. Charles eventually realized that no one man, no matter how divinely appointed, could hold back the tide of a changing world. In a final act of profound humility, he did what few rulers in history have ever dared. He let go. He divided his gargantuan empire, surrendered his crowns, and retreated to a remote monastery in the hills of Extremadura. He traded the clamor of the court for the chanting of monks and the rustle of the wind through the oak trees. He chose the peace of the soul over the glory of the scepter. As you breathe in and out, let your own burdens fall away. Just as Charles laid down his crown, feel the tension leaving your limbs, replaced by a heavy, comforting stillness. You do not need to rule anything tonight. You do not need to carry the world. Let the flickering embers of the fire guide you into a dreamless rest. The emperor has found his peace in the quiet hills, leaving his legacy to a son who will build a palace of stone to match the silence of his father's heart. The only sound in the deep midnight stillness is the gentle, rhythmic scratch of a quill moving across a sheet of parchment. This is the world of Philip II, the prudent king, a man who ruled the most powerful empire on earth from a small Spartan desk. He did not seek the battlefield or the spectacle of the hunt. He sought order. He sought the absolute control that can only be found in the quiet accumulation of detail. Around him, the massive, gray granite walls of El Escorial rise like a mountain, a palace that is also a monastery and a tomb. El Escorial is a labyrinth of stone, cold and unyielding. Its halls are wide and empty, designed to swallow the sound of footsteps and the echoes of the world. Philip lived here like a monk, dressed in simple black, surrounded by books and the portraits of his ancestors. He was a man of deep, uliginous sorrow, carrying the grief of lost wives and the heavy responsibility of a global empire. To him, the palace was a fortress against the chaos of the outside world, a place where time was measured by the tolling of a chapel bell and the steady, cold light of the moon on the gray slate roofs. The very shape of the palace, a vast grid, was inspired by the grille upon which St. Lawrence was martyred. It is a monument to endurance and sacrifice. Every stone was laid with a sense of eternal purpose, creating a space so quiet that it feels as though the air itself has stopped moving. Inside these walls, Philip found the only peace he could understand, the peace of absolute, unchanging structure. The world outside might be shifting and loud, but here, in the heart of the Escorial, everything is fixed in stone. Let the profound, heavy silence of the monastery wrap around you like a thick velvet cloak. Feel the coolness of the granite, the stillness of the air, and the absolute safety of these walls. You are tucked away in a place where the noise of the world cannot reach. The scratching of the quill has stopped. The king has finally laid down his pen. The light of the candle is snuffed out, leaving only the soft blue glow of the star. But far to the north, the absolute power of the stone is about to be tested by the wild, unpredictable mercy of the sea. Outside the window, a steady, relentless rain falls against the glass, and the wind whistles through the cracks in the old wooden shutters. On the dark, churning waters of the North Sea, the great Spanish Armada, the invincible fleet, is struggling against an enemy it cannot see and cannot fight: the weather. These massive gilded galleons, once the pride of the world, are being tossed like toys by the towering, white-capped waves. The dreams of an empire's total dominance are dissolving in the salt spray and the cold, gray mist. This was not a defeat brought about by the cannons of men, but by the sheer, overwhelming power of the element. For every ship lost to battle, dozens more were shattered against the jagged cliffs of Ireland or swallowed by the deep, hungry currents of the Atlantic. The Armada did not fall in a single moment of fire. It bled away in a long, cold autumn of storms. The survivors returned to Spain not as conquerors, but as ghosts, their ships battered and their spirits broken by the indifference of the sea. The failure of the Armada marked the beginning of a long, slow twilight for the empire. It was the first sign that the golden age was beginning to fray at the edges, like an old tapestry left too long in the sun. But this was not a sudden collapse. It was a gentle, centuries-long fading. The gold from the New World continued to flow, but the heartbeat of the nation had begun to slow. The grand ambitions of the past were being replaced by a quiet, collective sigh, a recognition that even the greatest of empires must eventually find its rest. Listen to the rain as it washes away the dust of the day. Feel the warmth of your room and the safety of your bed, protected from the storm outside. The ships have found their final resting place at the bottom of the deep, quiet ocean where the currents are slow and the light never reaches. They sleep now among the shipwrecks and the coral, their stories ending in the silence of the sea. You too can let go of the struggle. The storm is passing, leaving only the rhythmic sound of the water. But as the empire exhales, the decline begins to move closer to home, creeping into the very blood of the kings themselves. The slow, rhythmic ticking of a grandfather clock echoes through the vast, empty corridors of the royal Alcazar. It is a lonely sound, marking the passage of a time that feels increasingly heavy. In the heart of this silent palace lives Charles II, the last of the Spanish Habsburgs. He is a king who carries the physical and spiritual weight of generations upon his frail shoulders. Behind the velvet curtains and the gilded doors, Charles moves through a world filled with the ghosts of his ancestors, powerful men like Charles V, Philip II, whose portraits watch him from the shadows with unblinking eyes. The air in these rooms is still and smells of dry lavender and old dust. Charles was born into a destiny he did not choose, his body weakened by the very bloodline that was meant to grant him absolute power. Yet, in the quietude of his chambers, there is a profound sense of peace. He is a man of gentle spirit, a king who sought only to do right by a world that was far too demanding for his strength. To see him is to see the personification of an empire's exhaustion, a weary monarch holding on to a crumbling crown, with a quiet, heartbreaking dignity. Charles II was not a villain, nor was he a failure of character. He was the innocent victim of a family's immense pride. The century-long obsession with maintaining the purity of the royal line had turned the crown into a heavy, suffocating burden. He was the final fragile link in a chain that had stretched across the globe, and as he felt the end approaching, he did so with a calm resignation. There was no anger in his heart, only a deep desire for the stillness that only the end of a dynasty could provide. As you listen to the steady tick-tock of the clock, imagine the pain and the burden finally lifting from the king's weary frame. The struggle is over. The long Habsburg autumn is concluding, and as the sun sets over the Alcazar, it brings a merciful, quiet end to a royal line that had forgotten how to rest. You are drifting now, safe in the knowledge that all stories, even the most difficult ones, eventually find their way to a peaceful conclusion. A new dawn is coming from the west, bringing with it a fresh wind that smells of French gardens and the promise of change. The gentle rustle of heavy silk and the soft melodic murmur of voices at a midnight gala fill the air of the newly built palace in Madrid. The darkness of the old Habsburg era is being swept away by a wave of elegance and light. Philip V, the first of the Bourbons, has arrived, bringing with him the refined tastes of Versailles. The heavy grey stone of the past is being replaced by bright galleries, shimmering mirrors, and sprawling gardens where the fountains play a constant, soothing tune. This is a time of restoration, a careful, delicate rebuilding of a nation's pride. The air here feels lighter, filled with the delicate scent of powdered wigs and blooming roses. Philip V and his successors sought to bring a rational French order to the chaotic landscape of Spain. They redesigned the cities, widened the boulevards, and established grand academies of art and science. It was as if the empire had finally woken up from a long, troubled dream and was now taking its first refreshed breath in a garden of perfect symmetry. The gardens of La Granja, with their cooling breezes and emerald paths, became a sanctuary where the world felt balanced once again. The House of Bourbon did more than just change the laws. They changed the very face of Spain. They transformed Madrid from a somber, fortified outpost of faith into a vibrant, illuminated capital of the Enlightenment. The dark, narrow streets were opened to the sky, and grand museums began to house the treasures of the world. It was a golden afternoon for the monarchy, a period where the crown seemed to regain its luster, not through the fire of war, but through the gentle glow of culture and reason. As you drift through these luminous halls, feel the stability and order returning to the world. The chaos of the past feels like a distant memory, muffled by the thick ornate carpets and the soft light of 1,000 chandeliers. Everything is in its place. The world is calm, and the future feels as steady as a long afternoon nap after a busy morning. You are safe in this world of reason and beauty. But far beyond the palace walls, the winds of the world are shifting, and the quiet gardens of Madrid are about to be reached by a storm that no king can control. The slow, rhythmic clip-clop of horse hooves on a dusty road is the only sound in the golden light of the late 18th century. These are the roads of a changing Spain, where the enlightened king, Carlos III, is attempting to bridge the gap between a glorious past and a modern future. He is a king who walks among his people, a man of simple habits who transformed the city of Madrid into a jewel of the South. But even as the capital thrives, the vast empire across the Atlantic is beginning to feel like a fading dream, slipping slowly through the fingers of a crown that is growing tired. Carlos III was perhaps the only monarch of his line who truly saw the struggles of the common man. He built hospitals, improved the mail, and brought light to the dark corners of his realm. But the world was growing too large, and the ideas of liberty and revolution were spreading like seeds in the wind. The empire was like an old oil painting, beautiful and grand, but with colors that were beginning to blur and fade at the edges. The sun was setting on the colonial dream, and there was a quiet collective recognition that the old ways could not last forever. The reforms were noble, but they were the efforts of a twilight hour. As the king worked to modernize his nation, the far-flung colonies were already looking toward their own horizons. The bond between the old world and the new was fraying, not with a sudden snap, but with a slow, inevitable loosening. It was a time of bittersweet reflection, a period where the grandeur of the past was being replaced by a more modest, more human reality. The empire was exhaling, letting go of its vast reach and settling into its own skin. Let your mind drift with the slow-moving clouds over the vast Spanish plains. Feel the warmth of the late afternoon sun on your face, and the gentle swaying of the carriage. There is no rush to reach the destination. The world is moving at its own pace, and for now, everything is peaceful and still. The dusty roads lead toward a horizon that is soft and hazy, where the lines between the earth and sky dissolve into a warm orange glow. But as the shadows of the trees grow longer, a cold wind is beginning to blow from the north, a hurricane of ambition that will briefly turn the dream into a nightmare. The faint, distant tolling of an alarm bell is muffled by a thick morning mist that clings to the streets of Madrid. It is the year 1808, and the silence of the capital is being interrupted by the heavy rhythmic march of Napoleon's soldiers. The dream of the Enlightenment has been shattered by the cold reality of invasion. For a brief, chaotic moment, the Spanish crown is tossed between brothers and emperors, and the people of Madrid find themselves standing alone against the greatest army in the world. It is a time of smoke, confusion, and a sudden, sharp awakening. This era of upheaval is captured forever in the dark, haunting brushstrokes of the painter Francisco Goya. He didn't paint the glory of kings. He painted the soul of a nation in pain. Through his eyes, we see the shadows of war and the quiet, desperate courage of the ordinary person. The palaces were occupied, and the royal family was in exile, but the heart of Spain remained unyielding. It was a period of blurred boundaries, where the old certainties were gone, and the future was written in the flickering light of campfires and the echoes of midnight skirmishes. Yet, as the years passed, even this great storm began to fade into the mist of memory. The chaos and the suffering of the Napoleonic Wars eventually dissolved into the long, slow pages of history books. The pain that once felt so sharp has been smoothed over by the passage of 2 centuries. What remains are not the battles, but the art, the timeless, immortal images that have turned the struggle into a silent meditation on the human spirit. The ghosts of 1808 have found their rest, leaving behind a city that has learned how to endure. You are safe now, tucked away from the noise of history. The bells you hear are no longer a call to arms, but a gentle reminder of the evening hour. The mist is clearing, revealing a world that is quiet and still. The old struggles are nothing more than words on faded parchment, incapable of reaching you in the warmth of your bed. Let the stories of the past drift away like smoke. The world has found its balance once again. But the century to come will require a different kind of endurance, a long, quiet game played with the pieces of a fractured crown. The rhythmic, dry creak of wooden wheels on a rugged country road marks the slow pace of the 19th century. This is a time of kings who are no longer all-powerful, but rather pieces in a grand, complex game of political chess. Alfonso XII and Alfonso XIII attempt to hold the fractured crown together as the winds of republicanism and change blow across the peninsula. It is a century of long pauses and sudden moves, of monarchs who are trying to find their place in a world that is rapidly outgrowing the very idea of a throne. The end of this era came not with a roar of cannons, but with a quiet, dignified departure. In 1931, as the clouds of the Second Republic gathered, Alfonso XIII chose to leave his country rather than see it descend into the darkness of civil war. He walked out of the palace, not as a defeated man, but as a king who realized that his presence was no longer the solution. There was no gunfire in the streets that day, only the heavy silence of a man stepping into the unknown to save the lives of his people. It was a final, silent sacrifice of a crown for the sake of a nation. His departure was as gentle and inevitable as the last breath of a dying day. As the royal train pulled away from the station, the monarchy itself seemed to evaporate into the cool evening air. The old world of palaces and titles was folding itself away, making room for a new, uncertain reality. It was a moment of profound transition, a quiet folding of the map. The king was gone, and the land was left to find its own way through the gathering shadows of the 20th century. Listen to the rhythmic sound of the wheels as they carry the king further into exile. Feel the deep, settling peace of a story that has reached its natural pause. The struggle is over for now. The chessboard has been cleared, and the pieces have been put away in their velvet-lined box. You are safe, drifting in the quiet space between the old world and the new. A long darkness is coming, a period of silence and shadow, but it is a silence that will eventually lead to the most enduring peace of all. The distant, rhythmic sound of steady applause fades slowly into a profound and peaceful silence. It is the sound of a nation finding its voice again after decades of shadows. After the long somber era of Franco, a new figure emerges to lead the way back into the light. Juan Carlos I. He did not come to rule with an iron hand, but to gently unbind the chains of the past. With a calm and steady resolve, he guided the country toward a new dawn of reconciliation, turning the page on a history of conflict and opening a chapter of shared peace. The air in the plazas of Madrid and the narrow streets of Seville began to feel different, clearer, lighter, and filled with a newfound sense of safety. Juan Carlos made a choice that few in history have ever made. He placed the well-being and the freedom of his people above his own absolute power. He chose to be a constitutional guardian rather than a traditional autocrat, weaving the crown into the fabric of a modern, vibrant democracy. It was a selfless transition, a quiet surrender of the old ways to make room for a future where every Spaniard could breathe freely. This peace is not just a political fact. It is a living reality that exists in every home across the land today. It is the quiet security that allows the city to sleep, the steady pulse of a nation that no longer fears the night. As you drift deeper into your own rest, feel this sense of protection wrapping around you. The struggles of the centuries have been resolved, and the old wounds have finally healed into scars of honor. You are safe in the present moment, shielded by the enduring legacy of a man who chose peace over a throne. The crown has become a silent sentinel, watching over the dreams of a people who have finally found their way home. A soft, cool night breeze brushes against the stone balconies of the Zarzuela Palace, carrying the faint scent of pine and damp earth. In the quiet chambers within, King Philippe VI and the young Princess Leonor represent a history that is no longer a storm, but a steady, gentle stream. The crown they wear is not a weapon of conquest, but a symbol of continuity, a bridge of love and duty that connects 1,000 years of the past to the bright, open horizon of the future. The era of the sword has long since passed, replaced by a monarchy that lives in the hearts of its people. Leonor stands as the living link between the ancient kings of Toledo and the modern world of today. She is the promise that the story will continue, flowing forward with a new kind of grace and a quieter kind of strength. But as the lights of the palace are dimmed one by one, even the stories of kings and queens begin to recede. The grand tapestry of Spain, with its gold, its shadows, and its glory, is being tucked away into the velvet darkness of the night. The history is complete for now. The book is gently closed. There is nothing left to remember, and nothing left to do. The long journey through time has brought you back to the perfect stillness of your own room. Only you remain, your steady, rhythmic breath, and the soft, protective embrace of the dark. The flow of time is now a slow, gentle tide, carrying you away from the shore of wakefulness. Let go of the last threads of the story. Drift into the deep, healing silence where the past and the future dissolve into one. Sleep now, surrounded by the quiet echoes of 1,000 years, and rest deeply in the soft, eternal arms of time. Good night.